Hey, Sean, thanks so much for coming to talk today about your experience in Monterey.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Grant. I'm pretty excited to provide as much value as I can to someone else.
I love it. And just to give a little bit of context for anyone who's listening here, do you mind just giving a quick background on your military career and how you ended up in Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School?
Absolutely. So my first duty station was over in Camp Pendleton. I was a logistics officer over there. Spent some time living in San Diego and commuting from San Diego to Camp Pendleton. Then I moved over to wonderful Quantico, back next to the range, where I worked on the range where TBS works, called Weapons Training Battalion over there. From there, I moved over to Naval Postgrad when I got the notification I got accepted there, and so now I'm in Monterey, sunny Monterey.
Dude, I love it. And what program are you doing?
I'm currently an electrical engineering major, which has been an interesting experience for some of us.
Yo. Was your undergrad education kind of in a similar vein, or is this something completely new to you?
You know, I thought my undergrad major was similar to electrical engineering. I was a chemical engineer in undergraduate school. But rapidly I've learned that electrical engineering has very little to do with chemical engineering, and it's been very exciting.
In that program specifically, kind of what's your schedule look like on a daily basis? Because we've had a couple of people on talking about their experience, and we've had things from, oh yeah, I go to class like 3 days a week and it's not that bad, to other people who are like, yeah, no, I'm there 5 days a week and I have to study a lot. What has your experience been? How often are you in class? How much free time do you have? And just kind of what's your experience on the academic side?
No, absolutely. That's a really good question. And I think the best way to answer it is your schedule is going to depend a lot on both your major and your aptitude in that major and your previous experience, all three of those things. And so if you look at engineering, typically you'll see a more busy schedule. Electrical engineering tends to be a little bit busier since there's a lot of practice you have to do, especially towards the beginning of your time. So for instance, if you have some experience, you were an electrical engineer as a bachelor's, you're probably going to have a little bit more time in your master's program, because those who don't have that electrical engineering, specifically electrical engineering experience, you're going to have to take some classes to catch up, which is going to add some extra time to your schedule. Like for instance, you're going to be doing 4 calculus classes in 2 quarters. So that's a lot of calculus, and it takes a lot of your time up. But to answer you in terms of like the actual schedule requirement, I think it's not a terrible thing, because what it gives you is you'll have classes, and those classes will vary from quarter to quarter. So sometimes you're going to be in class from some very broken out chunks from 8 to 10 in the mornings on almost every day, and then you'll be in class from like 2 to 4, or you'll have some very varying pieces of class along the way every day. But you'll also have labs if you're in engineering, and those labs, while there's going to be a set block for those labs, most of the time you'll be able to coordinate with the lab technicians for a different time that will work well with your schedule. So that's a good advantage for engineering specifically.
That's convenient.
Yeah, it's very convenient.
That it's funny. It's funny that you say that, because especially like your aptitude or background in it. I have so many friends in the cryptologic warfare community, right, who were like some kind of political science or arts major in college, and then now that the fact that they're in the cryptologic community, they have to go get their master's in computer science, and you're like, there's a lot of catching up to do. So that can definitely affect the way in which your schedule kind of flows in those settings, and kind of just in terms of the actual area, right? You come out here, you're studying the academic aspect that you're talking about, but did you know anything about Monterey before you arrived? And if you did or didn't, kind of how did you start your search of like research on the area?
No, that's a really good point. And I was just fortunate because I was in a class for real estate research and investing prior to this, so that was it was helpful to get a chance to like learn how to do some research. But I mean, I looked at some of the basics, and I thought this move would be very important to me, because as most of us who have been to California know, the real estate out here is exceptionally expensive. So you want to make sure you make the right move, and you're very careful about what you do. So I was careful too. I spent some time.
Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned a real estate course that you learned how to research. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what your experience was with that?
Yes. So actually, I was in a course called the White Feather Real Estate Accelerator, run by Buddy Rushing, who you might already know. And basically, it takes you through real estate investing in a 6-month period, from like the building blocks to all the way to like building generational wealth. And so I was luckily in the period where we were doing market research, and that's like about a month to 2 months. So it was perfect for me researching Seaside, California, in that area.
Yeah, 100%, dude. So I'm also a White Feather Accelerator graduate. I love Buddy and his course. It's great, right? Like you're saying, for all those different aspects. And this is a conversation for a completely another time, but it is super helpful, right? And because of that course, I now own an investment property through my self-directed IRA, right? Like there's so many ways that you can get involved in real estate, which is really cool. And I think as a tangent to this episode, for anyone who may be interested, like that is an awesome course to look up and potentially look at signing up for, because it's tremendously helpful from a real estate education perspective, right? As a home buyer, as an investor, kind of no matter what your threshold for what you want to, if you want to dive head in or you're just looking to buy a home, right? And so that's super great. And you were kind of mentioning that you were doing research on like the city of Seaside. Had you identified that's where you wanted to live, or kind of how did you settle on that area as like, yep, that's where I want to be when I go out to Monterey?
No, that's an excellent question. I think those, especially for those who are considering the move out or have been told by the military they're moving out to that area, there are really like 4 specific areas to look at, and that's exactly what I did. So I looked at the Monterey proper area, Monterey, California, and Pacific Grove, it's right to the south of Naval Postgraduate School. It's the most probably the most expensive, nicest area in around. You're gonna see mostly rental properties there. You potentially could buy, but it would be kind of a stretch to buy something there. You might put yourself in financial difficulty. However, the rentals are nice, and Pacific Grove is absolutely beautiful. So I took a look at that area. It didn't really make much sense to buy in that area, so I looked at some other areas too. I looked at Marina, California, which is just north of Naval Postgrad and north of Seaside. It's probably about a 20-minute commute from Naval Postgraduate School itself. And it's an up-and-coming developing community where they are starting to build a lot of houses and specifically townhouses. They might call them condos, but whether or not they have adjoining walls is a speculation I won't make. It's a nice area, and they're building right with a beautiful view. So kind of up-and-coming. Definitely prices are going up there, and it's a good place. But the commute is just slightly longer. Depending on what your appetite is. For those of us who come from Virginia, 20-minute commute seems rather easy, but for those who come from California, a 20-minute commute is long. So it's really up to your discretion on that one. Let's see. So Marina was where I looked. I took a look at Marina. I then took a look at Salinas, California, that's a little bit east of the coast. So it's about 30 minutes inland. So you're going to see a commute time. If you go to Salinas, there are good things and bad things about Salinas as well. So Salinas used to have a really high crime rate. The crime rate is coming down significantly, and they've made massive strides in that area. It's also an up-and-coming community. You'll see opportunities for bigger houses in Salinas for about the same prices is what you're going to see, like anywhere from 3 to 5 bedrooms. So it's going to be a bigger house, and you're going to have probably more land, and for about the same price, and still up and coming, and that kind of stuff for Salinas. Specifically, the commute is what you're going to have to focus on, though. If you go on the far side of Salinas, you're going to have a commute about 40 minutes. Close side, you might have 25. So that's probably what your commute's going to look like. That's what you have to consider when you go to Salinas. Also, you're not on the ocean, so depending on what you like.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest thing that, like you mentioned. Those are the trade-offs. Every city that we've mentioned, Pacific Grove, Monterey, Seaside, Marina, all of those, you're kind of living the peninsula coastal lifestyle, right? Like you have beach access. You're close to the coast, and that comes with a couple of positive and a couple negative things, right? There's going to be a lot more fog in that area. It's going to be a little bit cooler. It's going to be tighter spaces. Whereas when you get out into Salinas, which is more inland, you kind of break away from that. You're going to get more sunshine. It's going to be warmer, but you're in more of an agricultural town. It's not a coastal town anymore. And so, from that perspective, it's a little bit different. But like you're saying, you could likely get a 4-bedroom house, close to 2,400, 2,500 square feet for the same price that you would get a 3-bed, 2-bath townhome in Marina that's like 1,400 square feet, right? And so those are definitely kind of some of those trade-offs that you're mentioning between the different areas. And I kind of want to touch on, because you were mentioning earlier, you're talking about, hey, renting in Pacific Grove or Monterey, but it sounds like you knew that you were looking to buy. Kind of what was that decision like for you, and kind of why were you set on, potentially wanting to purchase a home out in this area?
Absolutely. And just a quick touch on, so we covered those big other communities I looked at, and I settled on Seaside for a specific reason. One I did want to buy. And the reason I wanted to buy is I understand that real estate makes the most sense when you buy and you're planning on holding for a longer term. That's just like with the appreciation and the potential there, but there's a lot that goes into that decision. And California is tricky, specifically in Northern California with the high prices. It's hard to balance out the rent. So my decision to buy was specifically based on the long term, knowing that it would be a good place to have a house. And the other part of that, the reasoning behind it, was really when you look at the rental numbers. I mean, let's be honest, when you've been to if anyone who's ever been to a military community before, we all know that the landlords and those who rent to you know the BAH prices, and they set their rent about the same. So you're going to get a certain amount of BAH regardless. Like, what your BAH is going to be right around that area. So if you can find a place where you can buy and the mortgage with the interest and all that is going to be less than the rental, then you're essentially putting money in your pocket and you're building wealth for the long term, which to me makes sense. Even for me, even if I was sacrificing a little bit more in terms of mortgage cost, it would be better to buy than it would be to rent, since there's long-term gain as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you even offset that a little bit. You brought in a roommate, correct? And kind of how have you navigated that situation in terms of buying a home? And again, for just for context, your personal situation, right? Not married, you had that flexibility. You mind talking a little bit about how that factored into your decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. I am fortunate to a certain extent. Someone would call me fortunate to be single. Sometimes I wonder about that, but ultimately, it was helpful for the flexibility portion, right? If you have a family, there are additional obligations you incur in terms of making sure that you provide a stable and good living environment for your family, and specifically you'll see a lot of families move to like Salinas because that's where you're going to get a bigger house for your money. But for me, I had a lot of flexibility, and that gave me a lot of power to decide how I wanted to run and how much I had a higher tolerance for like a smaller space, and I could negotiate myself on many other aspects of the house, which allowed me to look more towards the logical, what does the price look like, what am I going to be able to rent it for later, and what does that look like. And I could do more of a logical conclusion, because as a single person you can tolerate a little bit more just smaller space and risk and those kind of things. So that's really what helped me. And when it comes to the roommate thing, we can talk about that in a second too. But yeah, just wanted to give you a chance to touch on that if you had any other thoughts.
I concur with that, and for the sake of keeping this episode kind of more about the area, I agree. Right, okay. I agree. So I'll kind of actually just turn it back to you to kind of hit on the roommate situation and kind of share your story and continue that.
Excellent. Yeah. So first and foremost, I have to contribute providence to how I found my roommate specifically. God was really at play there in terms of this should happen. Someone who from my actual class needed a room, and so we were able to work out a very good deal that helped him as well, since he has a dog and pets. From what I understand, again, I didn't do any searching for pets myself, but I think in that area it's difficult to find places that will take pets, which is kind of typical. So we were able to work out a good deal where I don't mind having a dog because I'm planning on doing some renovation of the house anyway. So we were able to really work out a great deal where he contributed to the mortgage, and so it actually cut my costs down to a point where it was totally tolerable to buy instead of rent as well. So house hacking is always a recommended course of action.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, right? And you kind of mentioned, and these are just discussion points for people as they figure out, because some people don't want the trade-off of sharing their space, right? But if that's something that you have the affordability, again, kind of the trade-off of, do you have a partner or are you single? Are you okay with those factors? Because like you're saying, affordability can be really tricky, especially as a single member in the Monterey area, right? Because things are really expensive, right? And, mentioning kind of it's sometimes easier to house hack and bring in a roommate, and you have a little bit more autonomy on that. And so I think all of those situations are really great, right? And I think that piece is really interesting. It's fun to have you on to kind of talk about that situation, because you've kind of went that route of bringing someone in and having a roommate, which takes away from some of the, potential personal privacy of the whole thing. But like you're saying, it works for you. and it's a great financial decision for you.
Right.
And so, yeah, just turn it back to you on that. Did that aspect of, your personal situation, did that have an impact on the decision of where you wanted to live? Like, did that make Seaside even potentially a little bit more appealing to you of like, hey, I'm single, I'd rather be close to NPS and have a place that can rent out to another single member that's close to NPS and we don't have to commute much? Like, was that a decision factor? Kind of what played in your mind in that decision when it came to, again, buying in Monterey based on your context as a single individual?
Absolutely. And I'd say first and foremost, don't, like, as a bonus point for couples, don't discount the buying power that you have if you are a couple. So for instance, we had a couple that came in with this dual military couple, and they were able to very easily go to Marina, which is a little bit more expensive, and buy a house without worrying too much about whether they could make that work. I had to be a little bit more careful with my numbers, and so. And I also had to consider my roommates, my longtime roommates, like considerations and what he was like wanting to do as well. So some big factors that did play into our choice was commute time was definitely big, because there is a significant, when you're in California, everything's within 20 minutes. Like a commute of 20 minutes seems longer to you. So, and also when you're going to class back and forth, it can stack up. So we did factor in commute time. It's about 10 minutes from my house to Naval Postgraduate School, which is nice. And we factored in price too. And the big things to look at for that is if you're looking, first of all, if you're going to buy, it's always good to like sort of have a strategy in place for what you're going to do with that house once you get ordered by the military to leave and go somewhere else. And that also factored in. So I took a look at the rental numbers for the different areas, and as usual, coastal towns tend to garner more rent. Salinas was a serious consideration for me, but you're going to see lower rental numbers there. And so when you look at the buy to rent ratio, you're going to see a significant disparity in Salinas versus all of the coastal towns I mentioned earlier as well. And that was what finally pushed me towards Seaside, which had that upside potential in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll kind of take this point. I don't know if this will be your plan. It requires more work, but something that we talked about when we were working together is that Seaside is the only coastal town in the Monterey area that allows short-term rentals, right? And so I think that piece is also very interesting, is if you're a person who wants to take a very active approach to real estate investing and kind of do the short-term rental thing, while you, because you can rent out a room, you can be a owner-occupied short-term rental, like while you are living there, and kind of rent out a room on a short-term rental basis. But also when you move out and you PCS, Seaside is the only city that allows that. Now, there are a finite number of licenses. Like, you have to apply for a license. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to operate as a short-term rental, right? There is legwork that goes into it, and you have to do that. But it is the only town that does allow that legwork to happen and for you to actually get a license, right? And so, just to double down on that, in general, even on the long-term rental side, kind of the coastal towns function better in that situation. But Seaside is also the one that operates as a short-term rental area. And so, potential interesting thing for someone who may be open to the idea of kind of operating and running a short-term rental as a home, right? And so,
and I can absolutely touch on this point if that's okay, because this is absolutely part of the strategy that I implemented. I came to the conclusion it was better to short-term rental a property afterwards than to long-term rental it, and I've discovered some things along the journey for that. One, there are a finite number of licenses. I'm actually number one on the wait list, so hopefully that'll come through shortly.
Let's go.
So I've got 2 years. Hopefully that'll happen, and I'm currently planning to do that. And there's two different sets of licenses you can get. One, there's an owner-occupied, which is what Grant was talking about earlier, and that one is a little bit more lenient. I don't know what the limit is on that, and I think that it's pretty easy to get those, but I'd call the city of Seaside to confirm that if you were going to do it. And second, there's a second one, and I don't remember what they call it, but it's basically non-owner occupied. Actually, I think that's exactly what they call it. And that's like when you rent it when you're not there. And that's like, that would be your future strategy if you were going to leave that place. And that's something to consider because there's a finite number of those.
I'm pulling up right now for the sake of this, the Air DNA data. I don't know. I was going to just like touch briefly on, potentially what you would expect as a 3-bedroom, 2-bed house in Seaside on kind of a a nightly basis. I don't know
And that's pure speculation from me right now because I'm hoping that my numbers are right.
Yeah, wow. Average daily rate, 308.
Yeah. And if you do, I think 6,000 a month is like the estimate, give or take. I don't know if it's gone up since then. It would be really cool if it was.
Yeah.
But you're going to see like a big disparity in like look at the patterns of like where those rates are allowed. So like certain rates get much higher certain places, and then other places the rates are much lower. So like you have to really take that into account if you do buy. But there's also some development which I do want to touch on if you guys when we have a chance, because Seaside's got some big development plans.
No, and Sean, thanks so much for sharing that and kind of giving us an insight into your brain there. Just rough numbers here without it directly in front of us. If you were to pull up AirDNA and look at the Seaside market, kind of the average short-term rental nightly rate is over $300, right? And kind of based on occupancy rate and that daily or nightly rate, potentially upwards of $6,000 a month in income, right? If operated well and done all these things. So, potentially a really great option. And I think there are even more factors that really appeal to you for Seaside and the appreciation and development in the area. And I'll kind of turn it to you to kind of discuss what you saw when it came to your decision.
Absolutely. And so the biggest things, again, we said commute were very important to me. It's nice to be within 10 minutes driving distance of Naval Postgraduate School. Second, I did some research on the actual development plan Seaside has. And I've learned a little bit more since I've been in the area, talked to locals and talked to those who know the area fairly well. And so what Seaside, we always wonder if you look at Seaside, the prices compared to everywhere else are a little bit lower than you'd expect for a coastal town. Carmel, you have houses averaging about $2 million. Seaside, they average about $800,000, which is still significant, but not comparatively. Also looking at the landscape, you'd think it'd be higher. So you're not really sure why. I think some of the limitation that we found is the water limitation, which they're slowly getting rid of. And as they do that, they're looking to develop Seaside in a bigger way. There's a whole development plan on their site that's like a little bit been delayed due to COVID, but they started construction in a lot of places over there already. I drive through some of the construction, which is really fun to see and watch as they put up new buildings, because one of the disadvantages you'll see in Seaside and most of the coastal towns around there, the buildings are a little bit older, so it's nice to have to see new ones going up. And with new buildings, new people, more income comes in, the house prices go up, and you see the cause and effect pretty quickly. So that's kind of one of the exciting aspects of being in Seaside at the moment. So if you're planning on moving soon, now's a good time to take a look. Yeah,
no, 100%. And just to follow up on the amount of, I would say, like you're saying, even some new development construction kind of flips and different things in the homes in the area that bringing in all this stuff is, I've mentioned this in a previous episode that there is no more true development, new construction in the Pacific Grove, Monterey, Carmel areas. The inventory is completely fixed, whereas Seaside and Marina are the two places where you're starting to see new development. And in Seaside, like you're saying, maybe not even necessarily new construction or new development, but just kind of renovations, an area coming in and new buildings get put up because there are some older homes. And you're starting to see, especially with the surge in demand, especially around the golf tournaments. I think this is something that, as a short-term rental person is thinking, you are, especially with a place in Seaside and the only place in the area that offers short-term rentals, you are the main market for anyone coming in to stay for, a PGA Tour event at Pebble Beach, a Pro-Am event at Pebble Beach, and just people coming in to take vacation and go golf at Pebble Beach, right? And the people who are taking vacation to go golf at Pebble Beach are people who financially are able to do so. Let's put it that way, right? And so, a really interesting, potential market from so many different factors, in again, these surge events for these kind of really high profile golf tournaments, right? And so, just a lot of cool factors, and things to consider and think about, when it comes to Seaside as an area. And just kind of just to talk a little bit about now your personal experience, kind of away from even the investment side, but just your experience. What have you really liked about living in Seaside? What would you consider some of the best things about living in Seaside? What have you really liked?
Absolutely, and I would say first and foremost, I really love the people. For one, like the community that is established here, and I'm in a faith-based community a lot of the time, so I like the community that I see here. But even outside, like the Naval Postgraduate School lends itself to building a community with both people from your service. Like I'm a Marine by trade, and so there's a very close relationship with Marines, especially since we're here. But also, I've made a lot of good friends outside of the Marine community and with other services. So it's the community building one that I really, really enjoy. And the second part of that would be the location. And by the location, I mean there are so much to do, and the beauty of everywhere you go over there in Monterey, California, in Seaside, in Marina, it's just absolutely breathtaking. Like you cannot find a spot, but it's almost, I tell a lot of people I know, it's almost unfair to the rest of the world that Monterey, California exists, because it's so beautiful. You're within 10, so most of the areas over there, and we can talk a little bit of specific locations, but they're just like they're within 10 to 30 minutes at best driving distance, and all the attractions over there. You could literally go nowhere and still be surrounded by natural beauty, and they're very good at conserving those things over there too.
Yeah, and let's just jump into that and touch on those, which is, you know, some of the trips and natural locations and landmarks. Kind of what are some of the places that you really plan on trying to visit while you're stationed here?
Yes, so I'll cover the ones that I've already been fortunate enough to visit. First, I took some time to visit the Great Sequoias because I've always wanted to do that. In Sequoia National Park, that was about 3 hours driving distance, so not very far, but it's essentially a natural wonder. Those trees are massive. You feel like you're surrounded by you feel very small and surrounded by those trees, and it's gorgeous out there. Then you'll also find, I took a drive down to Big Sur. Big Sur is absolutely beautiful, and the whole coastline is just absolutely gorgeous. But Big Sur is particularly breathtaking. You can't find a place like that I've ever seen before. And I've traveled a lot of places now, so those are the biggest. And Carmel Beach, so if you ever get a chance, especially if you are a real estate buff like myself, and you like the beach, you're in the right place if you go to Carmel Beach, because there's a beach right there that's just like, it's not too populated, but it's really nice, really well taken care of, and the real estate over there is just really cool to look at the houses. Like you look at houses, and I like to play this game with some of my friends when you go, like, how much do you think that house is worth? Like the first time we were completely wrong. We looked at one house, we're like, that's about $2 million. No, it was about $10 million. So we were very surprised. It's like the shops are beautiful. It's highly recommended.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any others that you plan on going to?
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the ones I've pretty much visited and touched on. Also, Point Lobo State Park, which is again beautiful. But besides that, I'm looking to go to Mammoth at some point. So that's not very. It's about 6 hours. I think it's 3 hours drive actually up, 3 to 4. And it's great skiing. It's probably the best skiing I think in the area. Like you'll find, like I've been to Big Bear, and I hear that Mammoth is much better. I love Big Bear, but I think Mammoth I've heard is really good. And then I'm looking to go to Yosemite National Park. The other thing to mention is if you are looking to drive and do some big hiking at some of the mountains on the Sierra Nevadas, there's a lot of opportunity for that. It's a beautiful drive. Keep in mind, you can't do a straight shot. A straight shot through Yosemite is limited. You can't always do that to drive across from west to east. You will probably have to go around the Sierra Nevadas, which can add about an hour and a half, 2 hours to that drive.
No, absolutely. Dude, I mean, kind of like you're saying, it's almost unfair how cool being in the Monterey Peninsula is, from your proximity to all of these amazing landmarks to just the stuff right around the area, right? It's such a beautiful place to be, and it's really cool. But for the sake of also just a slight reality check, you know, it's really fun to talk about all the great things of the area. I do want to just kind of turn it over to you to discuss some of the things that maybe you feel like are maybe some of the worst parts of living in Seaside or the Monterey Peninsula in general, just to provide a reality check. Like, what are some of the cons and downsides of the area?
Absolutely. No, that's a very good point, and every area has its downsides. I would say some of the ones that I found specifically in Seaside, it's the buildings, like I mentioned earlier. They're a little bit older, so you're going to find a little bit older. You're not going to see as like modern construction, so you need to make sure you look at that. There's possibilities for like old wiring and maybe weird wiring that maybe the owners did because they didn't want to add more expense to their own house. The other big things to look at as you're buying specifically are termite considerations. Termites in California in general, something I've learned recently since I was buying, are significant, and it's just something to look at and make sure that it gets looked at, especially if you're using the VA loan. We actually ran into the scenario where we couldn't the VA loan won't accept termites, so the owners from this previous house had to actually invest about, I think it was $7,000 to get termites, fumigate the whole house and get that done, and it was kind of a hassle for them, but it needed to be done. So that's just something to consider as you're buying specifically, and then later I can go into some others that are just general considerations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will touch on that really quick. Kind of like you're saying, the great part about California is there's not a lot of we'll use the term pests or insects or bugs. Like, it's a pretty great from that perspective. But the one thing that there is there are a lot of termites, especially in these coastal towns, right? And why that relates or really is important, especially if you're using the VA loan, is that you can't get a VA loan approved if there's any what we call Section 1 termite work, which includes kind of an active infestation of termites, right? And so in order to get the loan closed, we do need to clear all of the termites, right? So that will require a seller in most cases. Sometimes they'll put it on the buyer to take advantage of. But that's something that we would work, is to get the seller to take care of it, to get out. But you will have to kind of overcome that hurdle and kind of bring in a fumigation or treat the termites in order to get the loan closed, right? And so I would say in the majority of cases, which are two factors. One, like you're saying, they're older homes. And then two, based on location, the vast majority of the homes are going to have some kind of pest work that needs to get completed in order to get the loan closed, right? So I would just know going into it that is probably the likely situation that you're going to have to overcome, is kind of negotiate in working with a seller in order to fix or address kind of the termite situation in order to kind of close on a home. So thanks for bringing that up, and that's something that you would just want to go in knowing like, hey, this is probably a problem we're going to have to address, and then we'll move on. Exactly in your case, we can do it. It's easy. It's something that can get done, but it is just an additional hurdle. And I will turn it back to you now to kind of talk on some of the more general things that you were going to bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. Really just view that as an opportunity too, because like a lot of people don't want to deal with that. So actually, I got a good price in the house because no one else wanted to deal with that particular issue. So just something to think about. But so some of the other general considerations are space limitations. So with any coastal town, everyone wants to be in the coastal town. So you're going to feel a little bit closer together. Street parking is a thing, and it's significant. Like, you'll have a lot of cars parked on the street, and just something to watch out for, because parking is limited and because housing space is limited. You might feel just a little bit more crammed in, but that's kind of expected in a coastal town. So that's if you're looking in Monterey, Seaside, even Marina potentially, but it's mostly in Monterey, Seaside area. You're going to see some cars parked. When I say street parking, I mean it can be a little dangerous as you try to turn out of your houses or your streets, because the cars will be parked directly on the side of the road, right where blind spots are. So you just have to pull out slowly. But people over time have adapted to that, and they're careful and are most of them are careful. I mean, you always have your bad drivers, but they know that's a possibility, so they're careful about not hitting anyone. That's just something to consider when you're in the Monterey Seaside sort of area. Marina's a little bit better about it, and you'll have plenty of space in Salinas. So those are just things to think about in terms of space.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of on that, like with the street parking, is that the streets are narrow, right? Especially in Seaside, it's kind of a narrow area. You're not going to have these wide double-lane streets. It's a lot of one-way, directional streets, and people park on the street. So you kind of have like people parked and then just enough room for a car to go one way, right? And so just factors to consider, right? Like exactly what you're saying. At the end of the day, it all is trade-offs. And if you're, dual military couple, you maybe have a kid and a dog and you want space, then Seaside may not be the right spot, right? Just based on those factors. But, again, these are all trade-offs, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the reality of being in the situation, both the great positives and then some of the things that are factors that you have to deal with, right? And so that's really great. And just to kind of wrap it up, again, this has been such a great conversation, and we're going, but let's we'll start to bring it home here. I just want to ask kind of two things. One is, if there's anything you feel like you haven't touched on that you want to touch on, please, feel free to talk about it right now. And then just kind of a last recommendation or parting thought for anyone who's getting ready to PCS to Monterey. What would you tell the person who just got their orders, knows nothing about the area, and is getting ready to start this journey?
Absolutely. I'd first say some practical examples could be helpful in terms of like when we talk about those space requirements. So some things I've run into over the course of the last 6 or so months is when you get a new house, you have to install a new washer dryer. And some of the older housing required more, like the new washers and dryers, they're bigger than typical than you'd see back when the houses were created. So there was enough room to fit the washer dryer, but just take a look at that and make sure that the couple extra inches that we've added onto washers and dryers nowadays over the last 30 or so years isn't a prohibitive factor for you in terms of like hallways, blocking hallway access, that kind of stuff. And then the other option is even when they were installing it, for instance, the people who came in to help install the washer dryer, they had a big truck and they had to park directly in the street. Like they had no choice, and they had to move it a couple times as people were trying to get in and out of their houses. So they had to like take that truck and they had to drive it around the block. One of them had to drive around the block as to give everyone the chance to get out. So that was just like a consideration. And then, so the reason I bring that up is if you have a big moving truck, for instance, if you're PCSing and you're doing it yourself, for instance, or even you have movers, they're going to have to make sure they consider, or you're going to have to consider how you're going to unload your stuff, and do it in a practical manner so that you don't clog up the street, and you also don't find it yourself unduly in a hassle. So just something to consider as you go forward. And that's not all the cases, but it was in mine. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great insight.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, those are the things you don't think about, right, until they're actively happening.
Yeah.
Right? So really, really appreciate it. Anything else you want to touch on? Or are you feeling good?
Absolutely. Like just one more parting thought I'd say is
Yeah.
and again, I'm going to approach this a little bit from the investment standpoint as well, is like one thing to overall consider is Monterey, California, and that area, it's more expensive to live in than most of the places in the military are going to go. But that's also an opportunity, right? Like, so you're going to go to Monterey, and if you do it right, and if you analyze and look at the properties correctly, you're gonna have an opportunity when you move to be better off than when you started. So that the reason I say is look at Monterey. If you're going to Monterey, first of all, congratulations, it's an awesome place to be. Second, think about it as an opportunity and balance that opportunity with, how do you provide the best life for your family if you're married or have a family, or single? How do you seize that opportunity to also have a chance in the future to set yourself up for success, and whatever that looks like, right? Kind of consider those factors, really think it through before you make a decision, because you only get probably one shot at Monterey unless you're going back for a PhD. If you do that, let me know so I can learn how to do it too. So besides that, yeah, that's really all I have. I'm grateful to hopefully you guys are awesome.
No, dude. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was super helpful.
Good.
And super insightful, and I'm sure, from either a person who has a real investor mind or is just considering, Seaside.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful, extremely helpful on both fronts. So I really appreciate you taking the time to just come chat with us today. You're the man, dude. And congrats on finishing up those finals.
Thanks.
Quarter one down.
Thank goodness.
Man. All right. Well, have a great day. And to everyone listening, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out. And we'll be, more than happy to kind of answer any questions that you have. So, reach out to me on the Facebook page, on my YouTube channel, email Grant at the Vermeer Group, and I'll be happy to kind of address any questions you have. So thank you so much and have a good day.